What's up, everybody? Joining you guys live high atop a cold and somewhat drizzly Houston, Texas, after another Texas W. Left a lot to be desired there in the second half, but they got the job done. And out of pure respect to TCU, Emmy, I'm kind of glad that Texas is done playing TCU because they've been kind of that thorn in Texas's side. Even in the game Texas has won against TCU over the past decade, it's never been easy. They've always really been really competitive against Texas. And quite frankly, you can make the argument that TCU kind of has owned Texas over the past decade. And they made it close tonight, but Texas got the W. They're 9-1. So there are some concerns, major concerns, I would say, with this Texas team. But they're 9-1, and I'm not going to come on here and bitch because that would just kind of be a waste of time. Welcome, Emmy. I know you're not necessarily feeling all that great tonight, but thank you for giving it a go.
Yeah, man.
We're gonna have
Happy to
some.
be here, man.
We're gonna have as much fun as we can here on the 30th episode of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. I can't believe it. We're already up to episode 30, so
Yep.
we're doing well. All right. Well, let me throw this at you. Would you rather just react to what's happened in week 10 or week 11, whatever it might be in college football, and just talk for 45 minutes or so about the college football landscape? Or do you want to do our Texas football report card and get into our All Americans?
Um. Well, I think it would be fun to do a Texas football report card. I think maybe tonight can just be like a mixture of both. Maybe we do our Texas football report card and then just talk college football. Um. And maybe those will be my two segments, and then you can continue on with your All American predictions.
All right, we'll do our Texas football report card and see where we are. Um, so ultimately, what we're going to do here, what we have planned to do, is we are going to grade 5 aspects of this Texas football team. We're now through 10 games of the season. There are 2 regular season games remaining for Texas at Iowa State and Ames next Saturday night. That'll be a nationally televised game at 7 p.m. Central on Fox. And then on a short week on Black Friday, like Texas typically always does, the day after Thanksgiving at 6:30 p.m. on ABC, they will host Texas Tech to end the regular season. They're looking for only like their second 10-win year in the 15 years. So ultimately, sitting at 9-1, there's a lot to say here. So let's just jump right in. Uh, let's start with the coaching staff as a whole. Emmy, when you look at the holistic body of work from this Texas team so far this year, what grade would you give the coaching staff as a whole and why?
Well, the number one thing you'd love to see from a college football program's coaching staff is number one, recruiting the players that fit into your system, which Texas has done. And number two, you want to see that natural progression throughout the season as a team, not just on individual levels, like within, position coaching and all those different types of things, but as a whole, as a unit, grow as a team throughout the season. And I do think we have seen that. We've dealt with injuries, we've dealt with all different types of things, but I mean, at the end of the day, Texas has found a way to win these games, and I think that's the natural progression of Sark's tenure. I think maybe you nitpick and say, "Oh, you'd love to win these games by more," but wins are wins, and these are the games, as you said, that Texas would be losing in years past. Excuse me. And I mean, there's not much more you can really say. I mean, they're getting these victories. They've won with their backup QB, where their defense completely stepped up, and that's where I think you have to give this coaching staff credit. Is in those two games where Malik Murphy took over, the special team stepped up and the defense stepped up, and the unit around Malik Murphy really rallied and played tough. And even though those games were closer than they should have been at the end, they pulled them out as a unit. So coaching staff, I think I'm going to give them a strong B plus or A minus. That's kind of where I'm at.
I'm sitting at around a solid B. It's been good. Like, it's been good to win these games. You're winning games that you wouldn't have in the past. And I ultimately think, as a coaching staff, they're doing a really good job of recruiting. So that, I think, brings their grade up even more, to where I think you could be sitting in the B plus territory. I'm kind of straddling the line of B to B plus. Ultimately, it kind of boggles my mind, why this Texas team just can't step on these very average to not very good teams. I mean, we saw it in the Houston game. We saw it tonight in the TCU game. We saw it in the game against K-State, although K-State is a above the line, really good team, I believe. It just feels like sometimes there's a lot to be left to be desired with this coaching staff. I still don't fully trust Steve Sarkisian in one possession games with his clock management, his overall game management, and some of the personnel decisions. It kind of sometimes boggles my mind why they have CJ Baxter in these games late, when clearly Jonathan Brooks is the better player. The coaching staff's been good. They went into Alabama and completely took that game, beat Alabama by double digits, which no team had ever done while Nick Saban's been at Alabama. They're winning games. This program's at 9-1, and ultimately, I think there's a good chance, even with some of the struggles, that Texas finishes this year 11-1 and gets in the Big 12 championship game. They're sitting in a really good spot. I just feel like when it comes to game management, adjustments at halftime, sometimes there's a little bit left to be desired there. And I might sound like an asshole for nitpicking that kind of stuff, but ultimately, if this Texas team really wants to get where it wants to go, eventually going into a tougher conference, this is going to bite you in the ass eventually against better competition. So great job recruiting. Like recruiting, they're at A plus. We're about to get into player development here in a minute. They're winning games. I ultimately think, and I applaud them for sticking to their identity. The identity of this coaching staff is to be aggressive, going for it on fourth downs, trying to, they're all gas, no brakes, and largely they've shown that. It hasn't worked out at all times, but I think they've been pretty aggressive. They've stuck to that. They stuck to their word for the most part. It's just I'd like to see some things get cleaned up. That's all. So player development. I'll start on this one. I'm giving this coaching staff an overall solid A for player development. Ultimately, I think there's a good chance that 10, 12, 13 Longhorns get drafted this year. When you look at what they've done, going all the way back to guys that Tom Herman recruited. They've really done a good job developing some of these guys that honestly weren't making much of a game-to-game serious impact on these Texas football teams of past years. When you think about guys that were recruited as 3 stars, maybe low 4 stars, guys like Jahdae Barron, Jalen Ford, um, the list goes on and on. Jonathan Brooks. I think overall, Tavondre Sweat, Byron Murphy have both gotten better over the course of this Steve Sarkisian era. The list goes on, and I just think Texas is going to be a program moving forward that puts guys consistently into the NFL. They're going to get to that point with the level that they're recruiting at, with what they do in the transfer portal and what this staff has done, the individual position coaches from, Kyle Flood on that offensive line, making guys like Jake Majors, DJ Campbell, Hayden Connor, Kelvin Banks, an All-American in his first year. The job that they've done with Christian Jones, who really up until last year, that wasn't a guy that was in Texas fans' good graces. Like, he just wasn't performing like he is now. And this year, I think he has a good chance to be all Big 12 first team and potentially maybe not an All-American, but he's having a damn good season. You can make the argument he's been Texas's best offensive lineman this year. I just think all around, a guy like Jaron Thompson's a great example. He's just a really solid football player. I just think all around, a lot of these guys have gotten better individually over the course of this Steve Sarkisian era so far, and they're doing a great job with player development, something that Charlie Strong and Tom Herman didn't do a good job of.
Yeah, and you really see the buy-in as well. It's evident in just everything they do in the off, everything they've been doing in the offseason, everything they've been saying in the offseason. You put a microphone in front of any player in that locker room, and it's all, one team goal in mind at the end of the day. And I think the message has been solid throughout the entire coaching staff, and the players have bought into it. And it's been clear. And as you said, the depth has been fantastic for Texas all season long. And that's coaching. Having guys ready to play and knowing their cues, knowing where they got to be on the field. That's coaching. And, it hasn't all been perfect. There's been moments where things have been a little disorganized when you've had, injuries and backups in the game. Like, for example, the Oklahoma game. But for like 98% of it has been really, really good. And I think you got to give this an A. And by the way, in hindsight, I think you convinced me on the coaching staff part of things. I would probably move that down to a B because you reminded me of, some of the time management stuff. And I think you made some really good points there.
I mean, ultimately, you can make the argument that if Sark does a better job of managing the clock at the end of that Texas OU game, that Texas is maybe undefeated right now, but that's not an absolute. So we won't really spend too much time talking about that. But I just still do not fully trust this coaching staff to give them anything other than a solid B. They get the B because they're winning games. They're developing players. I mean, player development and coaching kind of goes hand in hand. They're going to put a ton of guys into the NFL. What Sark, I think, has done with Quinn Ewers, who we're going to get to here in a second, from what he looked like late last year. I mean, it got to the point last year where in that last game against Baylor, Texas wouldn't even let Quinn throw the football. Like they ran the ball to win that game.
Yeah.
It wasn't good.
Against
Oklahoma
Kansas
State.
State even as
Yeah,
well. Ran
Oklahoma
the heck out of the ball.
Oklahoma State last year. It was not good. To what Quinn looks like this year, it's drastically different. Now, we can talk about whether or not Quinn Ewers has been elite this year or not, and he's had some injuries to go along with that. But I think it's a solid B for the coaching staff and an A for player development. So, with all that being said, what grade do you give Quinn Ewers so far this year?
I think, and keep in mind, I slept slashed, missed this entirety of the TCU game. So take this with a grain of salt. But I think for Quinn Ewers, as you said, it's been overwhelmingly positive. I think some of the gripes that I still have with Quinn is some of the, um, next level quarterback play in terms of exiting the pocket when it collapses and having that extra pocket sense. But I think every other part of his game has improved. We mentioned the deep ball a lot early in the year. The fact that, he wasn't hitting it to start the year. He didn't really hit much of them last year, if I remember correctly, as well. And that has progressed throughout the season. And I think there's been, quarterbacks at Texas that have been the same dudes coming in as they were going out. And Quinn has not been like that at all. He's had that constant progression. It really just shows in his work ethic. And, it's it hasn't all been perfect, but I don't think a lot of the stuff with the offense has been on him. I think he's been very consistent. So I'm going to give Quinn an A.
I'm giving Quinn an A minus. Ultimately, when you look at the college quarterback efficiency rating for Quinn Ewers this year, if he finishes out the year and nothing else changes, which is still, yet to be seen, he would have the second best statistical season for a Texas quarterback in the history of this program. From a quarterback efficiency rating, right behind 2008 Colt McCoy. He's been really good. He hasn't put the ball in harm's way largely, other than that OU game, where I still think he played a really good game, even with those turnovers. There was a point where I think near the end of that game, he had completed like 24 of his last 26 passes or something to that effect. And he still, led Texas back in that football game to the point where Texas was leading with a minute 15 to go. He's been really good tonight. There was some rust, obviously coming off the injury. I going in, expected that. That wasn't really of a surprise to me, but he made some excellent throws. One of which down the left sideline to Xavier Worthy. That was good to see them connect again on kind of a deep ball. He let it go up perfectly the right time, and it was kind of on a line right down the sideline. He made a couple of great throws tonight to Jatavion Sanders over the middle. And the Quinn Ewers Xavier Worthy connection was on tonight. Worthy had a great game. He made a great throw in the end zone to A.D. Mitchell for one of the touchdowns, where it's kind of a back shoulder throw where only Mitchell could get it. Overall, it's been really good. He's not blowing you away statistically like Bo Nix or Michael Penix Jr., guys who already have, I think, 30 touchdown passes on the season. Quinn only has around 20, I believe, or maybe even less than that. But he's been hurt twice. And ultimately, that's something I kind of worry about with Quinn Ewers. He's kind of had the same issue 2 years in a row with that shoulder injury. Hasn't stayed on the field yet for a full football season in college football. Obviously, I think some of the things he did in the offseason to lose some of that weight and get more in football playing shape have helped him in some ways, but also maybe hurt him in some ways. I think you would like to see him put on some weight going into the NFL. It's been a good year for Quinn Ewers, and he's ultimately, I think, been more the reason why this Texas football team is winning than he is for any. I mean, I don't put really any of the blame on Quinn Ewers for some of the struggles that Texas has had. I think that was a great point that you made. So I think it's ultimately, if you're having the second best season from a Texas quarterback, from a passing efficiency standpoint, and you're completing over 70% of your passes on the season, and you've only thrown 4 interceptions so far this year, you're not turning the ball over, and you're just playing solid football on a game-to-game basis, and you're winning football games, you can't really go any lower than the A level. I mean, this is what Texas has needed. And he's not quite on par with Colt McCoy from 2008, but he's pretty damn close. So A minus. I think there's a chance that if Quinn Ewers plays really, really well the next 2 games and wins Texas a Big 12 championship, and this team, say, finishes 12-1, even if they don't make the college football playoff, there's a chance that at the end of the season, I think he could get a solid A or an A+. I think there's a really good shot of that. Offensive line. Where do you stand on the offensive line?
I think the offensive line has been great. The rough moments that they have had has particularly been with backups in the football game. And anytime you move players around on the offensive line, you move backups in, there's a different chemistry that has to be developed there. And now that that has happened, and now that you get healthy again, you're right back to playing great offensive line. I mean, it's been across the board, really. I mean, Kelvin Banks has been elite. That has been I love to see him getting the love that he got from Joel Klatt on the broadcast last week as well, and just across the board. I mean, I think that's. I was gonna say the best unit on this football team, but I would have to. No, I think it is the best unit on this football team. I'm gonna say it with my chest. I think the offensive line is the best unit on this football team. I'm gonna give them an A+.
I give them a solid A. They've been really good. The moment that stands out to me was ultimately the last 7-ish minutes of that Alabama game where they're up 10, they need to put the game away, and it was run, first down on the strength of that offensive line with Jonathan Brooks and CJ Baxter to run out the clock in Tuscaloosa. That's been the signature moment of this Texas offensive line season so far. They've obviously dealt with a couple injuries. They inserted the 5-star offensive lineman from the 2022 recruiting class, DJ Campbell, into the game or into this starting lineup a couple games into the season. And it's been really nice to see his development. There's been a couple games this year where DJ Campbell has been the highest graded Texas offensive lineman coming out of a couple of these games. He's been an upgrade over, who was it that was playing last year? His name will come to me in a minute.
Yeah.
But I think overall, Christian Jones is a guy that I think is going to play in the NFL. I don't know what the forecast holds for him in terms of a from a draft perspective, but he's been really good. Kelvin Banks is awesome, and it's going to be so nice having him back for another year next year. Hayden Connor has improved. Jake Majors has improved. They're getting pushed consistently in the running game. The reason I'm not at A plus is because I think there are moments, especially in short yardage, where the offensive line just isn't doing a good enough job getting push in these short yardage situations. Uh, I think Texas needs to be better there going into the SEC. I think there are moments where they lack a little bit from a physicality standpoint, especially in the red zone. But I mean, you can't really nitpick them too much. They've done a really good job keeping Quinn Ewers upright for the most part, keeping Malik Murphy upright in the 2 games that he played. There hasn't been a game this year other than maybe the first half against Rice where this offensive line has really, really struggled and kind of been the reason why Texas wasn't playing well. So it's a solid A. I still want to see some more physicality in those short yardage situations down in the red zone where you can just kind of like Michigan or Georgia, Alabama, where you just know like 3rd and 1, we're getting this first down because of our offensive line. They're going to, kick some ass, create some space, and we're going to get these first downs. But can't really nitpick them too much. It's a solid A for me. Now, if we see the red zone offense improve and they start, getting those getting better in those 3rd, 4th and short situations, I think it could be an A plus. But right now it's an A for me. This is where the conversation is going to get interesting. Our last aspect of this team that we wanted to talk about is the secondary. Where do you stand right now on the secondary?
Sorry, say it again.
Where do you stand on the secondary?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the secondary, well, I think there was a period pre Jalen Catalon injury, as I would describe it, and post Jalen Catalon injury. And it also coincided with the injury to Ryan Watts, the star cornerback, as well. So I think the secondary, there's been some inconsistencies there, absolutely. But I find that you really haven't been able to just like work the sidelines against this Texas team. It's really been the middle of the field where they've really given up big, gashing, pass plays. And, the tackling at times has been hit or miss, literally. And I mean, that kind of stuff, when you're secondary, you're giving up big chunks, it really puts you in a bind. And they've been able to, handle most of these teams, but I'd love to see them like play a complete 4-quarter football game
That'd be
like they
really
did
nice.
against Alabama or early in the year. Like this, this right now, I would say is a B minus, and that might be generous. That might be very generous.
I'm straddling C plus, B minus. I ultimately can't really decide, but I don't think it really matters.
Hmm.
Um, I think ultimately what we might need to realize is this is a Pete Kwiatkowski defense that, even going back to his days at Washington, is kind of a bend, don't break kind of defense. And one of the things you can say about this Texas team is overall, they've been really good in the red zone. There was a drive tonight that may have won Texas the football game, ultimately, when you look back on it, where Texas once again, TCU gets into the red zone. They get inside the 5-yard line, and 4 straight plays, Texas stands up and they get the ball back. TCU comes away with no points. I think ultimately what we might have to realize is this is kind of a defense that relies on disruption in the backfield. They want their pass rushers to get home. And there are times this year where that's not been happening, and it allows quarterbacks to work the field over the middle. This team gives up yards. They're 78th right now in the country and overall yards given up through the air. It's just, it hasn't been bad to the point where it's, been detrimental to the results of these football games. And they've had good moments. Michael Taft is a guy who ultimately got hurt early on tonight, but has really come into the game in wake of some of these injuries to Catalan and other guys. Keaton Crawford has been hurt the past couple games, and he's really stepped up, made a couple plays. Tonight, Terrence Brooks had an interception. I thought he played maybe his best game of the season from a coverage standpoint. I think Ryan Watts, outside of his injuries, has been really good this year. Overall, I just think Jaron Thompson is a solid college football player that'll find a way to make it in the NFL. Like, I feel like there's talent in this secondary, enough talent against most of these average-ish quarterbacks that they're playing right now in the Big 12 to make it through, to be good enough. And that's ultimately kind of where I sit. Like, they've been okay. C+, B-. They're giving up yards, but they've done pretty good job in the red zone. It's just late in these games where they kind of let up a little bit, and you'd like to see them kind of shut it down. So I don't think it's all on the secondary. I think there are times where the Texas pass rush could help this secondary out a little bit, and it's not doing that. But ultimately, it's been probably one of the areas where I think you can actually have some concern for this Texas team, although it is a position group that I think has a lot of really young talent. Derek Williams is a guy who is a borderline five-star safety, the number 2 overall recruit in the state of Louisiana behind Arch Manning last year's recruiting cycle. And he's been on the field a lot in wake of some of these injuries. And I actually think he's played like above the line for a true freshman at that safety spot. I think Malik Muhammad, the 5-star corner, has done a really good job this year when he's been in the game. But overall, there are moments where they lack some communication. They're giving up way too many yards. They're not doing a great job of tackling in space. And against quarterbacks that they may face down the road, you worry about that a little bit. Some of the better quarterbacks that they could find themselves facing, if things go their way and they're able to, say, get into the Final Four, the college football playoff, I worry about that against Bo Nix. I'd worry about that against Michael Penix Jr. I worry about that against even like a team like USC, teams that really thrive on throwing the football. So
even Florida State, Jordan Travis.
Right, exactly. So with their receivers, Keon Coleman, Johnny Wilson, I mean, it's not been the strength of this Texas football team. It's looked good at times, but it's also not looked very good at times. And ultimately, you land kind of right in the middle, C+, B- ish.
Yeah.
So
I think we stand about the same spot there.
35 minutes in, we're done with that segment. Ultimately, I feel like what needs to happen is for the next 15 to 20 minutes, let's talk about what happened around the country today. Give our thoughts on Week 11 in college football, even though there are some games still going on. I mean, Oregon's playing USC. There are a couple other games going on. Let's kind of reset the national landscape after Week 11. And what I'm going to do is, since you're not feeling great, I'm ultimately kind of tired. I wore myself out tonight yelling at the TV, especially during the second half of that Texas game. And I just need to take a chill pill because this Texas team, for the past month, has been giving me some real anxiety issues. And I know
I hear you, man.
going into tomorrow, where most of these Steelers games are coming down to the wire, I'm going to need to take a breather, get some rest, and get ready for tomorrow. Although I actually do feel pretty confident that the Steelers are going to kind of hopefully step on the Packers a little bit, especially considering that I think Rashawn Gary and Jair Alexander may miss that game. But that's just another story for another day. Let's talk about.
I hear you there, man. I'm spent as well. Like my job had me working 6 out of 7 days this week, so
Yeah.
it's not a normal schedule. Let's just say that.
So I don't want to half-ass the college basketball Americans or ultimately our conference predictions. So I'm going to make a commitment, and Emmy's not going to be on all these episodes. He'd probably be on one or two this week. But I'm going to make a commitment to try to get 3 dit holes in this week. Although not all of those, like one of those might just be kind of like a 30, 45-minute kind of thing where I get in the college hoop stuff that I need to get in. So I'll tweet out the plan. But for right now, let's just go ahead and kind of give a recap of what's gone on around the country today. So from what you saw, what stands out to you the most?
Well, we knew this would be a big week for the Big 12. And it was. It really was. And not in the ways that we would have thought originally. We knew Texas would have a test, and they had one. And Oklahoma, in theory, was going to play one of the 2 lost teams in West Virginia, having lost, while having lost 2 in a row. And they just absolutely smacked up West Virginia. So I think the cream of the crop really separated a little bit more this week, especially with the loss of Oklahoma State this week as well. Really changes things. But beyond the Big 12, though, Florida State, big win today by 7 points against Miami, pulled it out. That's how they've been. That's how they've been winning as well. Very similar to Texas in some ways. Not always pretty, but getting it done. And then Washington, that Utah team. I mean, they're feisty, but I'm not gonna, jump from game to game. I'm gonna let you give your thoughts as well. What did you think of that? First of all, what did you think was what game jumped out to you the most today?
This might be a surprise to some people, but I think there's an argument to be made right now that Alabama is playing the best football in the country.
Yeah.
Not only did they beat a well-coached Mark Stoops team in Lexington today, 49-21, and not only did they beat LSU by 2 scores last week, where they just totally outplayed them in the second half, but Jalen Milroe gets better and better each week. Today, 15 of 22, really efficient, 3 touchdowns, 1 pick, 230 yards. They ran the ball for 160 yards today, and that defense is just nasty. When you look at, what they have on that defense, the physicality of that secondary with Caleb Downs, Terry and Arnold, Kool-Aid McKinstry, who's going to be a top 15 kind of guy in this upcoming year's NFL draft. What they have up front with Chris Braswell and Dallas Turner being one of the best edge rush duos in college football. With Nick Saban, they are a freight train running downhill. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the SEC championship game is set. That's what stands out to me. With Tennessee losing to Missouri, Georgia, and Georgia's win, of course. But even before that Georgia-Ole Miss game, Georgia had the SEC East wrapped up because Tennessee has a couple more losses in conferences, and there's just no way that Georgia loses that. And then Alabama has now locked up the SEC West with their win over Kentucky. I cannot wait for this game between Alabama and Georgia. I think they're on a collision course. Georgia's playing really, really damn good football. I think people got to tip their caps to Carson Beck and how good he's been. And what is this, his true freshman season? I mean, he hasn't had the stinker yet, and he's playing really damn good football. They might get Brock Bowers back next week. He was a game-time decision tonight. He ultimately, I don't think, played. But they're going to get him back by the end of the season from what it sounds like. And I just think it's been a great year of college football so far. There's been a lot of parity. There are more teams in the hunt this year, I think, for the national championship than in any other year that we've had here in the past couple of years. But part of me wonders, like, with the way that Georgia's playing and the way that Alabama's playing, is it all going to be for naught? Is this just rinse and repeat? One of these teams is ultimately going to end up, being in the national championship game and maybe winning it all. I think Michigan has something to say about that. Hell, even Ohio State might have something to say about that. Maybe even Oregon or Washington or even Texas. But
yeah, Oregon would be the one I throw in the barrel.
To
But
me,
that's another conversation for another day. I'll say my piece on Alabama.
Okay, go ahead.
This team feels like one of those, John Calipari Kentucky teams where you have a lot of young, almost young, highly recruited guys. It's a little different in that that team does have some veterans, definitely, but they've grown throughout the year. And one thing that we always used to say about those Kentucky teams with, Karl Anthony Towns and John Wall and all those guys is they find it in February, like late February, when it matters. And in college football, that's November. And that's where Alabama is right now. There is real freight train type of stuff right now. I mean, sheesh. I mean, if Alabama really wins out here, I mean, we were talking about one of the best turnarounds in college football history.
Yeah. I thought ultimately Michigan kind of did what I expected them to do. Credit to them for coming out and just winning that football game. They didn't throw a single pass in the second half.
Yeah.
They ran the football with Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. I just think there's another year of development that needs to occur with Drew Aller in this Penn State offense. They're not quite there yet. The Big Ten, though, is only going to get tougher next year with Oregon coming and Washington coming, USC coming, UCLA coming. So it's hard to say where I stand on Penn State, but ultimately, with a lot of the returning talent they're supposedly going to have next year, with Drew Aller kind of going through some of these growing pains now, and being set up well for next year, I think it's not all doom and gloom for Penn State. They weren't ultimately able to get over the proverbial Ohio State Michigan hump this year, but ultimately Michigan's just a better team. And if it were up to me, I might rank Michigan. They're definitely number 1 or number 2 in my book.
Yeah, definitely.
We
And
can we can put that Michigan hasn't played anyone conversation to bed now.
yeah, you play the teams in front of you. And I think they haven't played anyone conversation is I think it should be on a case by case basis, because if you're playing no one and you're, say, Iowa, for example, winning by 3 points, scoring 3 points, winning by 9 points, all that, or winning by 9 points while scoring 9 points specifically. I mean, that's different than what Michigan is doing. Michigan, it's an entirely different situation there. And all of the scandal stuff aside, they're right there with Bama and Georgia in terms of teams playing at their best right now in college football. And to me, there's 5 of them playing at their absolute best as a team. And that's a lot for late November.
Yeah. Anything else stands out? Ultimately, credit to Missouri for just dispatching of Tennessee today. Missouri, Eli Drinkwitz with Brady Cook, Luther Burden at the receiver position, and what that Missouri team has done. Now sitting at 8-2. I think it's 8-2. Yeah, 8-2 with an opportunity for that program to win 10 games, maybe even get to a New Year's Six bowl. They deserve a ton of credit. The SEC is not easy. Even in what people can maybe still argue has been kind of a down year, although now with Alabama and Georgia looking like powers once again, I'm not sure you can really say that. But even in what was at some points in times a down year for the SEC, it's still the toughest conference to play in college football because of the week to week grind of it. And Missouri's done an excellent job. Ultimately, this year, I think is very important for them in both the NIL world and the recruiting world. I mean, they're still in on a guy like Ryan Wingo, who Texas has a commitment from right now, but they have Williams Narani, the 5-star defensive lineman. I probably totally butchered his last name, but they're recruiting better. They're playing good football, and you have to give them credit.
Yeah, and they're a program on the rise for sure, which is, goes back to the Ryan Wingo conversation, really, and how Texas stole him from the state of Missouri. But I think the only other game that we should probably mention is maybe that USC Oregon game. I'm pretty sure is
Right
I'm
now,
pretty sure would be in the third quarter right now.
Oregon leads 22-14 at half over
Okay, yeah,
USC at Autzen Stadium. Let's see. Bo Nix is 8 of 12 for 262 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions.
wow.
Against a not very good USC defense, but I mean, he's doing what
8 completions
he's
for
done.
262 yards is insane. I would love to see the yards per attempt on that. Oh my
Troy
gosh.
Troy Franklin has 2 catches for 147 yards and a touchdown. He's averaging 73 yards per reception right now in this game. So he's probably had I haven't watched a second of this football game, but I'm guessing had 2 really explosive plays.
Yeah.
But USC
Must have.
right now only down a touchdown, and it's a one possession game. Caleb Williams has yet to throw a touchdown pass. They're hanging in there. So we'll see what happens in the second half. I'm not sure USC's defense is going to be near good enough to win this game, but they're hanging in there right now. The one
Yeah.
other thing I
Yeah.
wanted to mention is Arizona, albeit it was a close game, got another win over Colorado today in Boulder. I believe the final score was 34-31 on a game-winning field goal. And now you look at Arizona and what they've accomplished this year. They're now sitting at 7-3. And when you look at their remaining schedule, they host Utah next week, and then they play 3-7 Arizona State. So if they can beat Utah at home next week, and then beat Arizona's a not good Arizona State team, and they win out 9-3 Arizona in the Pac-12 with an opportunity to go to a good bowl game and win 10 games this year. That's not something I would have thought would have happened entering this year. They're playing really good football. They're one of the teams right now that really isn't getting a whole lot of attention, but they've beaten UCLA by 3 scores. They beat Oregon State. They beat Washington State 44-6. They lost in triple overtime to USC, but that was a really competitive game. They were in a 1-score game with Washington, ultimately lost, but um, they played teams tough. They beat down on UTEP. The real head scratcher this year was early on when they lost to Mississippi State, 31-24 in overtime. But, wins over Oregon State, UCLA, Colorado on the road, Washington State sitting at 7-3 with an opportunity to possibly go 9-3. Credit to Arizona, man. Emmy?
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good.
I dozed off a little there.
I was just talking about Arizona. It's all good.
Yeah, yeah. I heard. Yeah. Arizona's been really good. I haven't watched much of them outside of. I think it was the Washington game early on in the season. I think,
Yeah.
or it may have been USC. But either way, they've pretty much given every team they've played a fight.
Mm-hmm. Two other things before we wrap this thing up. Texas Tech was able to go into Lawrence today and beat a Kansas team that was red hot. Taj Brooks, the running back for Tech, has been really, really good. 3 straight games over 100 yards rushing. That Tech team that really struggled early on. A team that had higher expectations this year than what they've achieved so far, but they're back at 500, at 5-5, and they have an opportunity to make a bowl game. So give credit to Texas Tech for a big time road win, a road win that program desperately needed to kind of salvage what's been a disappointing year in Lubbock. K-State took care of business. That looks really good for Texas. At the very least, they really dispatched of Baylor, even though Baylor's not good, putting up 59 points. Looks good for Texas. Florida State pulled out a close one, but they were up 2 scores in that game at one point. Credit to Washington for winning another hard-fought game. And then, whoa, what the hell happened in that Oklahoma State UCF game? I'm going to be honest, I didn't watch much of that, but
I don't.
That's Josh Pate talked about it. He did say this week, I have Oklahoma State at 8 on the upset meter. And I thought, Gus Malzahn, UCF's coach, tends to do this once a year where he, his team will get up for a game and they'll win a game that they're not expected to win. But nobody expected this. They shut down Ollie Gordon
Yeah,
in the run game,
that's
and
crazy.
they ran all over Oklahoma State today. So credit to them. Must feel good, for a couple of these teams in the Big 12, a couple of the newcomers to the Big 12 to get that kind of win. Last thing I want to do is I want to check on this Iowa State BYU game, which is the last kind of important game of significance right now in the Big 12. And ultimately, Iowa State is up 38-13. So, going to be another battle next week in Ames, but we'll be talking about that and so much more this upcoming week on the Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports podcast. So, thank you for tuning in tonight for a quick efficient hour where we did our Texas football report card and talked about week 11 in college football. Just nice and easy, laid back episode. We will find a way to get in more college basketball content this upcoming week, our All-Americans, our conference predictions. Ultimately, I might want to do something with the Champions Classic on Tuesday, where we get Michigan State against Duke and Kansas against Kentucky. Maybe we'll do some reactions to those games. Arizona just beat Duke last night. There's been some interesting stuff that's happened the first week or two of college basketball. And then there will be plenty of more college football content to come as we go down the home stretch towards conference championship games. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Emmy, for battling through whatever you're battling through. Hopefully your stomach or whatever starts to feel better. And we can have another great week on the Raw Prospect podcast. Any parting shots?
No, just made it, man. We got another win. Survive in advance.
Survive in advance. That's ultimately what Texas needs to do right now. And ultimately, I said 10-2, getting to Arlington would be a successful season. So at the end of the day, if Texas finishes this year, say 11-1, and they win a Big 12 championship game, I can't really say much because they would have exceeded my expectations. So even though it hasn't looked the prettiest at times, and Texas isn't necessarily winning a beauty pageant right now in college football, they're winning. And that's something you can't say about this program the past half decade to a decade. So, credit to them. All right, let's get out of here. Another great week of college football. You'll see us back this week. We've got a ton of content coming for you. Hopefully, we both feel a little bit better come tomorrow so we can get all this content in. But, what is it? Raw rundown, NFL power rankings, NBA episode, and Dit Hole all coming for you. So, all that being said, just like the Texas versus TCU era, and out of pure respect to TCU, like I said at the beginning of this podcast, I'm so glad that Texas is done playing TCU for the foreseeable future at the very least. We are gone. Hook 'em horns. We're 9-1, baby.
Hook 'em. Peace out.